Good day, everyone. Good to see you guys all again. Decided to do a little bit of a switch since most people are back at church and things are, I don't want to say getting back to normal, but things are getting a little bit different now. I wanted to start posting the videos on Wednesdays instead of Sunday. Outside of, I preach once a month at my church. Those I still will post on Sunday. But these straight on videos I want to do on Wednesdays. Just want to make sure that I'm balancing my life. And, Sunday mornings I usually try to spend some extra time with the kids as well. It's my day off that when all of my kids are here. So today, I just want to get straight into it. We're going to be looking at how we carry ourselves and who carries us. The first thing to look at is how we carry ourselves, is how I believe as Christians we have to stop being timid. We have to be bold and brazen and all those synonymous words like that. I've talked about this a lot, but I am mentioning it again because it's important. One of my favorite characters in the Bible in church, in preaching, is the character of Bartimaeus. This story is told in Mark chapter 10, verse 46 through 52. And so they came to Jericho, this Jesus and the disciples. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. Now, this is a thing that, and I talk about this a lot, but I think a lot of things bear repeating. We repeat everything else in our lives. Why not repeat the things of God? Bartimaeus was blind and was a beggar. He had no reference point of what Jesus could do. He's never seen Jesus heal anyone else. Now, he may have heard it, yes, but he probably heard it secondhand, because how many people are stopping along the road to talk to a beggar and then tell them about things they saw in other cities? He heard secondhand, more than likely, about what Jesus did. And so when he heard that it was him coming along, he said, "This is my time. I got to do it. It's now or never for me." And if he had just had faith but sat there quiet, what would have happened to him? Bartimaeus would have died a blind man. I don't want to die blind. I don't want to die with the same affliction or the same issue that I had yesterday. You can have all the faith you want, but it is not enough. James chapter 2, and I'll explain that as well. James chapter 2, 14 through 19. What good is it, my brothers, if a man claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such faith save him? Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you says to him, "Go, I wish you well," keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? In the same way, faith by itself, if it is not accompanied by action, is dead. But someone will say, "You have faith, I have deeds. Show me your faith without deeds, and I will show you my faith by what I do." You believe that there is one God? Good. Even the demons believe that and shudder. So he's saying that you can't just have faith. Faith isn't enough. You have to have work behind that faith. That's the key part. Bartimaeus had faith Jesus could heal him, but he needed to get Jesus' attention. He needed to speak up. His deeds had to get him front and center with God. The woman with the issue of blood is a story that we all know. She tried everything, but did she just have faith? No, she put in some action. She said, "If I can go and touch his clothes, I can be healed." She didn't just say, "Oh, that's Jesus walking by, I'm healed." If she didn't get up and do something, she would have continued in her sickness. Again, I don't want to continue in my sickness. And my prayer is that you don't want to either. In the story of Jacob, when he was wrestling with the Lord, he said, "I want my blessing now. You're not going anywhere until you bless me." We have to not be timid. We have to demand it. Demand the things that you want in life. And you guys know me, this is not a prosperity message. But there are things that you are believing for. You need to demand them the same way that the heroes in the Bible did. We have all of these examples in the Bible of how to do this. But again, you can make your own example. You can be your own example. You can demand those things from God. Now, I usually preach tough messages, and people will say, "Oh, you beat me up with your sermon today." But God never gives me fluffy messages to preach. I'm never given the prosperity messages to give. And this is nothing against those people that preach that, but I can only give you what God gives me to teach. God told me once that you can't talk about the reward before the work is done. A lot of us, we ain't done the work yet. You don't let your kids get rewarded when they didn't do what you commanded them to do, right? That's the same way God is. Now, what would happen if your child, what would happen to your child if you rewarded them all the time without doing the work? They would become spoiled. Some of us want to be spoiled by God. We have to go and get what you want. You have to not be timid. One of my favorite characters in history is Frederick Douglass. He wasn't a timid person. Uh, there was this one time in his my favorite story about Frederick Douglass. There's two stories that I want to talk about with him. The first one was, in this time period, it was illegal for slaves to read or to teach them to read. There had been a lot of issues that happened with slaves reading. Then they started to read the Bible. Then they would start to revolt and have revolutions. The story of Nat Turner. He was taught the Bible, and then they would only tell him certain passages. But when he found out that there were other passages saying that, hey, we shouldn't be slaves, then he led a very deadly revolution. So they really made up all these laws to not teach slaves to read. So Frederick Douglass was a kid, and his owners, the wife of the house, started teaching him to read. And one day the husband came home and saw that the wife was teaching Frederick Douglass how to read. And he let her have it and said, "If I catch you doing this again, I will have to kill you, because if they find out that we did this, they'll kill both of us. We cannot teach him how to read." So Frederick Douglass was not timid. He didn't just say, "Oh, woe was me, I won't be able to read." He went into town and he would teach kids. He would have kids teach him how to read. He would trick them. And he would say, "Oh, a cool thing to do is when you point at something, you spell it out and then you read it." And so the kid would point at a wall and he would say WALL, wall. And so he literally forced himself to learn how to read. And that is, to me, that's just the thing about not being timid, going out and getting what you want. Later on in life, as Frederick Douglass grew up, he's at another plantation, and there is a person that has a reputation, and his name is Edward Covey. Edward Covey was known as a breaker. He would break slaves so that they would be obedient. He was renowned across the colonies as a guy that will get it done. And so one day, Edward went to get a whip to whip Frederick Douglass, and Frederick Douglass took the whip away and said, "You're not whipping me." And then they started a fight, and they fought for hours, and they ended up fighting to a draw. This gentleman, Edward Covey, never said anything about it, nor ever tried to test Frederick Douglass again. The reason why Edward Covey never said anything about it is because this would mess up his reputation. His reputation of being a breaker. Now, if you have someone that stood up to him and didn't let themselves get broken, that would ruin his reputation. We have to stand up to our problem. The same way Frederick Douglass stood up to wanting to learn how to read, the same way Frederick Douglass stood up to not being broken. We have to stand up to our problems. Some of our problems have been beating us down every single day. We need to take the whip away from the problem. And we need to step up to that problem so that they know better next time to try to test us. Now, there's a reason that I tell a lot of stories about American slavery, and it's not because I'm black. It's not just because I find history fascinating. It's also prevalent a lot of times as we are slaves to sin. Let's look at another way on how we carry ourselves. Let's look at what we accept. Sometimes our number one option doesn't work out. So here's a sports metaphor. So if you don't like sports, I apologize. So there was a basketball player named Sam Bowie. Sam Bowie was drafted and he was picked number 2. The player that was in the draft, so you get a draft and there's the worst teams usually pick in order. So the first team drafted a player by the name of Hakeem Olajuwon, who people regard as one of the greatest players ever play. The number 2 pick was Sam Bowie, who I mentioned. Then the number 3 pick was the gentleman you might have heard of by the name of Michael Jordan, who a lot of people regard as the greatest player to ever play. Now, if I showed you a picture of Sam Bowie, you probably wouldn't be able to guess who he was. But the team that drafted Sam Bowie felt that they needed him because Sam Bowie looked the part. Everyone makes fun of Portland for drafting Sam Bowie instead of Michael Jordan, but no one ever makes fun of the Houston Rockets for drafting Hakeem Olajuwon instead of Michael Jordan because Hakeem Olajuwon fit the part. He looked the part, and then he walked, he talked the talk and walked the walk. He was a great player. So they say Houston got a great player, and Hakeem won championships from them. Yeah, Jordan might be a little bit better, but this was a good pick. Everyone makes fun of Portland for making this draft. But Sam Bowie looked the part. There are a whole bunch of look the part people that are weighing us down. Sometimes we make choices that set us back. Has anyone ever been set back by a choice that they made? But fortunately, we have someone that can bring us back. This person that could bring us back has conquered death, so he can conquer your problem. He can conquer my problem. He has brought people back. He brought Lazarus back. He brought Jairus' daughter back. And he brought me back. We can't be timid. Jesus wasn't timid. Again, another example of how to not be timid. He cleared the temple courts that were filled with money changers and the like. He was speaking with authority as a child in the temple, as I mentioned last week. You think that he lost this quality? But sometimes we get set back, even with our non-timid actions. Sometimes we marry our problems. Some of us are married and don't even know it. We're married to misery, married to self-doubt, and married to fear. Don't let the negativity in your life become your way of life. Let's look at a person who let the negativity become their way of life. So we're going to talk about the story of the prodigal son. And a quick fact about this story is also referred to as the story of the 2 brothers, the story of the lost son, the story of the loving father, and the story of the lovesick father. Now we know this story. A son asks for his inheritance and goes and lives it up and spends his money on everything under the sun. Eventually he runs out of money and is working and taking care of someone's pigs and eating with the pigs. He comes to his senses and goes back home. He approaches the town and sees his father at the town's gate. Now the son couldn't text his dad and say, "Hey dad, I'm coming back today." He came to this realization while he was eating with pigs and decided, "I'm going back home today." The point of this story that we miss a lot of times, that father was at that gate every single day waiting for his son to come back. Now there's a couple of reasons why. Because those setbacks those son made, that sin that he made, that asking for that inheritance, that basically wishing his father was dead, that would be dishonoring his father, at that time period, that sin was punishable by death. If anyone saw him in that village or in that town, they could have had him stoned for death for dishonoring his father. That loving, lovesick father was there every day waiting for his son to come back so that he could restore him and wipe away the wrong that he did. God is waiting for us to come back. But some of us get so happy in our filth. Some of us are like that son eating with the pigs, but we're satisfied eating with the pigs. And the people will tell you that you aren't good enough, but remember who's waiting for you at the gate. We get so in love with our setbacks, or so in love with the lies, or so in love with the less thans. But I don't serve a less than God. I serve a more than God. And he has something better for me, because God's got me. Nobody else might, but God does. Sometimes we want to hold on to our less than life, even when God shows us the door out. He shows us how to remove ourselves from a situation, from abuse, from neglect, from pain, from anxiety, from depression, all these different things. God shows us a way out. But we have to stop being timid. We have to bravely walk through that door. We have to be brazen. Psalm chapter 119, verse 11 says that God has hidden his word in your heart. Now, he didn't hide the word, but he hid the word in your heart. Matthew 15:18 says, whatever comes out of a person's mouth comes out of their heart. What do you have in your heart? There's this old saying that people would say, sort of with affection. They would say, you're to die for. I carry myself like I'm to die for because Jesus died for me. I'm so special. Darren is so special. You listening are so special that if there was a stipulation to where everyone else could be saved through crucifixion except for you, Jesus wouldn't have done it. So I'm proud. I'm bold. I'm brazen. I'm not timid. I am to die for because Jesus died specifically for me. I was on his mind while he was on the cross. We need to start carrying ourselves better. How are you carrying yourself? Are you carrying yourself as someone that's priceless or affordable? Are you carrying yourself like God's got you? That God is waiting for you to come back? Or not? You can't find God because he's not hiding. He's where he's always been. He's waiting at the gate for you to come back from your filth. Two things before I end, speaking of filth. Have you ever seen a pig roll around in filth before? The pig gets a bad reputation for being a dirty animal, a nasty, vile animal. But the reason why the pig rolls around in mud is because the pig has no defense to the sun's rays. So it has to coat itself in the mud to cool itself down. The pig's filth is keeping it away from the sun. Keeping with this sun metaphor, there's this Greek mythology story of the story of Icarus. Icarus and his father are in a prison, and his father is some sort of an inventor, and he makes these wings that have wax that hold the wings together. And he says, Icarus, fly away from this prison, but be careful, don't fly too close to the sun. Icarus puts on the wings and he flies away. But he's like, I want to go higher, I want to reach higher. My dad said don't go too high to the sun, but I think I can go a little bit higher and be fine. Icarus goes so high to the sun that the sun starts to melt the wax in his wings, and then he falls and perishes. Now, I told these two stories for a reason, for a specific reason. How are you carrying yourself? Now, Icarus perished because he flew too close to the sun. But I'm here to tell you that you may perish if you don't fly too close to the SON, sun. If you don't fly too close with God. That pig has that filth that separates him from the sun. That's the same way that sin does in our lives, where it separates us from God. Carry yourself like God carries you. Don't steer away from the sun in any way. Remember that God has got you. Where do you have him carrying you, though? Know who you are and know your worth. Don't get comfortable rolling around in your filth, because that's what's keeping you from the sun. Thank God for a blessing to the reading of the word. You guys have a great week. I'll see you next week. Bye.